You're listening to the Decidedly podcast with Sanger Smith and Sean Smith. Our mission is to help business owners like you defeat bad decision-making so you can improve your health, wealth, and relationships. We do this by digging deep into the stories and expertise of our guests and distilling their knowledge into actionable wisdom for you to carry into your life and business. If you're new to the show, welcome. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. If you prefer to watch this week's episode, head on over to YouTube for the full video. Now, let's get into this week's episode and defeat bad decision-making in your life and business.
So you're making me nervous. You bring out a knife. We're sitting here.
It's my fidget spinner.
What do you mean?
It's a pocket knife. It's my fidget spinner. I'm not going to hurt you.
When did you? Well,
listen, man, calm down. Listen, chill out, man.
You tried,
dude. What's the problem, man?
Just because you've got a knife, like
yeah. What are you scared?
When did you start carrying a pocket knife?
I did for a while, like in college, and then I stopped, and then my friend Steve gave me this pocket knife for my birthday. I think either my birthday or Christmas, or not very long ago.
I was never one of those guys who carried a pocket knife. You know, my grandfather did. I knew guys who did. There's on one end there are those guys who have them like outside of their belt.
Yeah. I did that move for a while. It wasn't for me.
I was never one of those guys either.
Yeah. Well, you don't need it until you have it, and then you realize how often you need it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you just kind of find a way if you don't have one because you don't have one.
You just got to be resourceful. But once you get one, you're like, oh my gosh.
You find yourself using it a lot?
Well, oh yeah, of course, every single day. And then
really?
Yeah. Oh, all the time. And then I had to go without it for a few weeks, like maybe 3 or 4 weeks, because I accidentally took it to the airport.
Okay. Did you take it through, did you?
Well, I realized I had it before I did. And then you go, okay, well, I got no option. We Ubered to the airport, so it's not, I can't even go throw it in the truck.
Oh, what'd you do?
They have a mailbox so you can mail stuff back.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, you do it all yourself. You go up to the box, you get a bag out of the box, you fill out your address and your everything, and then you fill out your credit card information, you put it in the bag, you drop it down the chute, and then they take it, they process it, they bill you, and they deliver it. But it does take a while.
I have a buddy who tried that, but he tried it with a pistol.
They're probably not going to do that one.
They are not as forgiving, turns out.
He tried to go through the
He didn't know. He had it in his bag. He didn't know it was like one of those bags. You know, he had it in there and he grabbed it and packed it and forgot to take this pistol out. And they do not have a sense of humor, apparently. He's on the no-fly list now.
Really?
Or the automatic scan. Or
permaban.
He may not be no-fly, but he can't get like the pre-check thing.
Who cares about that?
Well,
that pre-check's a scam. Yeah, I think so. So here's the thing. Pre-check is for a bunch of dorks like you who desperately need your validation of like your order in the societal hierarchy. You go, no, I'm better than people, so I have to do pre-check. And you know what? This is what happens 9 times out of 10 when I go to a flight. The regular person line is shorter than the pre-check line, and people will sit there and still go get in the pre-check line.
I have no.
And that proves my point. That proves my point. Because if you ask people, they're like, oh my gosh, pre-check's awesome. It's so much quicker and you can keep your shoes on. And I go, okay, well, when it's not faster, you still do it. And you're wearing flip-flops, so that keeping your shoes on doesn't even matter. Yeah. It's all about making yourself feel better.
Above taking social validation.
Oh, yeah, at least you admit it. You're one of the rare few. So you still get the same judgment from.
I'll pay for it.
Clearly. Whatever. I would be very nervous about accidentally taking a firearm to the airport.
Yes.
You're going to end up with a conversation with the FBI or something.
You don't want that.
Speaking of a conversation with the FBI, that's what we're doing today. Joe Navarro spent 25 years in the FBI. He was the youngest FBI agent when he was hired, and he wasn't just hired. He was recruited to the FBI. So think about that. Think about what kind of secret skills and talents this guy must have had in college. He spent his career focusing on hidden messages to catch spies, reading criminals, navigating high-stakes situations, and he is recognized now as one of the leading experts in the world on body language, international bestseller, What Every Body Is Saying. Our conversation with Joe Navarro was engaging, intriguing, educational, and at times funny, sort of. I'm Sanger Smith with my dad, Sean Smith, and this is Decidedly.
You were the youngest agent to join the FBI, is that right? It's like 23 or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, actually 22. I was approached when I was 22, and then there was a hitch in that legally you have to be 23 so that you are eligible for full retirement. So I actually had to wait a year to be brought on board. But yeah, I look back on that and I always wonder, should a 23-year-old be given a badge and a gun? Yes.
So you're approached. What happens? Is this like, talent scouts in the FBI? I didn't know they had those. I thought that was only in Hollywood.
Yeah, I didn't know they had them either. They do. Both the NSA, the CIA, and every once in a while, the FBI will look around universities for talent. Obviously, NSA looks for mathematicians. CIA looks for people with languages. And so one day I get a phone call. This guy says, I'd like for you to approach or fill out the paperwork, come down to the FBI office. I was at the university. I was at Brigham Young University, and I thought it was a joke, so I hung up on him. And yeah, that joke ended real quick the next day when two guys in a suit showed up.
Oh, no kidding.
Oh, yeah. No. That was no joke. And they handed me an envelope, and they said, this is an SF form, something or other. Please fill it out. And I was poor, so I was happy to be approached and be offered a career. So
it sounds like one of those offers you can't refuse type things.
Yeah, I can't imagine saying no.
Well, for me, it was really something special because I had fled Cuba as a refugee. And so for me, I saw it as a way back to pay back my country that had taken me in. And so I thought it was a great opportunity to serve, and I did for 25 years.
What kind of cases did you most enjoy working on? A lot of spy. I mean, there was a lot of spy type cases, right?
Yeah, but in the good questions. In the beginning, I was sent out to the Phoenix division of the FBI. So most of it, I was working crimes on government and Indian reservations. So I think the first 3 years, I worked homicides on the reservations. I worked rapes. You work with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but basically you're the sheriff on the government reservations because they're in essence sovereign countries. And so I learned a lot about crime scene work, photography, collecting evidence, testifying. For me, it was a great experience because then when I was transferred to New York, where I got to work counterintelligence, I had such a wealth of knowledge about testifying in court, collecting evidence and all that. So it was really a good experience.
When you were working in counterintelligence, you had a chance to, we at the time, you were 23, so that was, tensions were pretty high with Cuba. You had just immigrated. Did they purposefully place you in counterintelligence in Cuba?
Well, this would have been 1978. And the Cuban Missile Crisis had just taken place in 62, 63, I believe. So,
He's not that old, okay? God, geez, rude.
Oh, no. No, I'm old. But tensions were high. with Russia and East Berlin, and you remember the face-off with the American tanks facing off with the Russian tanks and the wall. And I think they put me to work counterintelligence because there was such a need. I mean, that was one of the primary roles that you played in the New York office was the counterintelligence role, because we had diplomats pretending to be diplomats, but they were actually spy. During that time period, up to 85% of the Russian presence at the UN was Soviet KGB. So,
but don't we sort of just expect that, though? I mean, like I would assume 100%.
Well, you still would assume that, but you've got clerical employees and you've got the career diplomats and stuff like that. But that was the assessment of one of the Russians that defected. He is the one that said, "Hey, 85% of us over here are up to no good," and so that really put a large tasking order on us.
When do you think you had that moment, the welcome to the FBI moment, where you're like, oh, this isn't just like fancy police work. This is real deal federal work?
Boy, that's a profound question, Sanger. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. Well, it was one of those things where I could look at it two ways. The first time it hit me was the first bank robbery I went to, and I responded to in Phoenix, and you walk in and, here's the bank tellers. They're scared. The bank manager was scared. But then the local law enforcement officer who got there just before I did turned to me and said, "Okay, you're the FBI. What do you want to do?" and that's when it hits you. It's not like television. You have a lot of responsibilities. You got to separate the witnesses. You've got to take statements. You've got to collect evidence. There's a lot. There's a lot of responsibility with that job. Yeah.
Yeah. In most cases, that I'm sure everyone's looking. Nobody's looking past. Nobody's arguing, I would say, with the FBI. I would imagine on the crime scene, like, no, I got this. Or does that happen occasionally with like overzealous local officers?
Well, I mean, I remember being in once I was transferred to Tampa, Florida, and both the FBI and the local sheriff's office responded to a hostage situation at a bank. And that's where it gets kind of interesting because, obviously the sheriff wants to get reelected. He's got his troops. The FBI is just, we just got to do our job. We do have federal jurisdiction. The money is protected under FDIC. So we have, and then the question is, well, who has primary jurisdiction? And so you get into that kind of tug of war, but it's usually a very genteel sort of thing. Then you work it out. Okay, you guys deploy here, we go in, and you guys negotiate and that sort of thing.
I would think when you talk about body language and reading subtle nonverbal cues, that might be easier when you're dealing with criminals and bank robbers, but perhaps more difficult when you're dealing with professional spies or counterintelligence from Cuba, Russia, or something like that. Did you find that to be the case?
Body language is a funny thing. Most people don't think about it, and yet it's so honest. Earlier as we were waiting to get on the air, I could tell something was wrong. Just from the body language,
that was Sanger.
Okay, all right. We were having technical difficulties.
So, there's a certain honesty about it. The other thing is your ego doesn't allow you to see sometimes what other people see. So a lot of the spies, you'd see them walking down the street in New York, and they don't realize that when they're operational, for instance, now instead of smoking 2 cigarettes per hour, now they're smoking 4 cigarettes per hour. That normally they would be walking on the outside of the sidewalk, but now they're walking on the inside of the sidewalk. And so, or they're looking over their shoulder more. Little things that you don't think about, but that your brain is saying, hey, you need to pacify because you're stressed, so you smoke more. You need to hide in the open, so you walk on the inside of the sidewalk, not the outside. And the natural inclination is to just look over the shoulder a little bit more than usual. So even the most well-trained spies usually gave something up. Now, not necessarily in the face. I think in one of the interviews I did a few years ago, I talked about the East European spy who had entered the United States through Canada and was passing himself off as an American. And I just happened to be looking at, this is how old it was. I was looking at a 35 millimeter movie of him. This is before video. And as he left it just happened, the surveillance caught him on Valentine's Day, and he's exiting with a bouquet of flowers, but he's carrying it as an East European and not an American. Americans carry the flowers with a bouquet up. East Europeans carry it bouquet down. And that actually was what I used when I finally confronted him. And rather than ask him, well, are you a spy? We did what's called a presumptive. I just sat him down and I said, do you want to know how I know? And I said, the bouquet of flowers. And then, he shut his eyes and he just realized he blew it.
Well, and so he knows that's so significant that he can't even argue it.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's how the brain works. Basically the amygdala works on fear. The brain doesn't understand subtleties. It just understands fear. One item was enough to trigger the fear response. And he had to deal with that. And he realized that, oh, shit, he had worked so hard on his accent. But that gave it up.
That's so interesting because you're right. Like I found I've never seen anyone carry a bouquet of flowers upside down. I guess, well, they would call our version upside down. But it's not like one of those things that's, most people do it this way. Most people hold their fork this way. No, it's like everybody holds in the West, holds a bouquet of flowers. So he recognizes immediately, oh, it's over. I can't argue my way out of that one. I can't justify that one. It made me think, are there people, or do spies exploit our general acceptance of immigrants in this country? Because if you're telling me, hey, this guy from Eastern Europe pretended to be an American, until you told me he worked on his accent, I was imagining, oh, well, obviously that's the best way to go. Because if I meet an Uber driver who was born in Greece and he lived till Greece till he was 25 and he has a Greek accent and he's lived here for the last 30 years, I don't really think anything weird of that. But if the opposite, in Russia, oh yeah, I'm an American. I just moved over here though. 20 years ago. That's not going to fly.
No. Yeah. And, all the intelligence services focus on whatever is exploitable. So in America, obviously it's a democracy. It's the openness. We don't America's the only country I know of that doesn't have a national ID card. In most countries have, like in Latin America, they have the cedula. In all over Europe, you have a national ID card, which you can't just all of a sudden show up and appear and claim this or claim that. So everybody has, even to get electric service, you got to have your national ID card and so forth. So they will exploit the openness of the United States. But listen, I remember in the late 70s where Chinese students were sent to study in the United States. And they would come, and Russian students too, they would come with like $125 spending money for food, but according to the librarians that we talked to, about $3,000 worth of Xeroxing privileges. Now just think about that for a minute. So you don't have to be an FBI agent to get the message there. When these kids they weren't even kids, some of them were in their 30s. I mean, they couldn't even hide it. They said, well, we're graduate students, and, they're showing up barely able to eat, but they've got all this money. This is back when you had to have these pay cards to access libraries. And you figure, okay, they're just stealing technology, and we're giving it away.
How did you know something like how Eastern European people carry flowers? Like, as a guy coming from BYU, I mean, how do you know that?
Well, I mean, I went to BYU via Miami, via my travels overseas. This is where, travel gives you a tremendous advantage. Where you see the practices of people around the world. For instance, something that in the United States we might ignore, but what's called proxemics, which is how we use space. Now, this has a lot of application in business, but you realize in certain countries you're allowed to stand a lot closer than, say, in the United States. In others, you have to stand further apart. But it also has to do with hierarchy. And so a lot of times, for instance, the Russian Aeroflot plane would arrive in New York claiming that the third secretary, which is a really low position at the mission, was showing up. And yet, as soon as the guy stepped off the plane, you notice that he would immediately hand his coat and his briefcase to an underling to carry. Well, once again, you realize if no third secretary would ever do that. Hierarchy is something that's highly revered in Russia. And so obviously this guy is using the title for cover, when in fact he became the number 2 person at the KGB.
What is the advantage? Assuming this is they're going to visit the embassy. What's the advantage of lying about who's coming?
Well, the advantage is if you say you're the third secretary, basically you're saying, don't pay attention to me. I'm just the guy that stamps the visas. And then you sort of get to hide in the open. But it was through, if you understand culture, if you study the nonverbals, you realize the other thing, I remember this vividly, is whoever sets the pace, especially in business, whoever sets the pace is actually the leader. And it doesn't matter who is walking ahead. The person that's actually setting the pace is actually the one in charge.
And setting the pace when people are walking?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. See, in in cultures that are context rich, like Asia, you would never walk ahead of, if you're in charge, you're in the lead. But in cultures such as ours that we don't have that rich context, we can be a little looser, but we still establish our hierarchy by setting the pace. So I don't have to ask around and say who's in charge. I can just see who's everybody waiting for.
In our culture, if I'm going through a door with my wife, I will stand at the door and let her come in front of me. And they did not do that in Japan. And there were a lot of other very stark differences to me, in terms of greetings and structure inside of offices and all those types of things. Yeah. How do you determine, I guess knowing those things is important. Are you able to pick up on these inconsistencies when you're talking to somebody in an interrogation? You bring somebody in, hey, we think you're a spy. Now the light's on them. How do you determine what is going to be an inconsistency that they're just demonstrating versus just a stress reaction because they've been nabbed?
So there's certain behaviors that are innate and they are seen all over the world. And we know that, I know that because in 1974, I started studying children who were born blind. And these children would perform these same behaviors having never seen them. So you notice a lot of times when the stock market does poorly, you'll see the pictures that come out is some guy on the floor going like this, right?
Yeah.
Pressing on their eyes and so forth. The first time I saw a little girl who had been born blind, when she heard something she didn't like, they don't put their hands over their ears. They cover their eyes and they've never seen. So how would they know that? So these things are in our DNA. They're part of our paleo circuits. They're very ancient. They're certainly as ancient as archaic humans 300,000 years ago, but perhaps even later. Perhaps going as far back as Australopithecines. But in any case, so things like lip compression, right? You're sitting at a table, things aren't going well, there's going to be a lot of lip compression. When you see a lot of people testifying before Congress, you see a lot of lip compression. Nothing to do with deception. It has to do with stress. You'll see lip pull, where the person will purse their lips and pull them to the side, which usually means I disagree with you. Or
is that something that you think is just inherent, or is there a biological component to that? So if you talked about pressing the eyes. Is there something about pressing the optic nerve that creates a stress relief biologically?
Yes. Yeah, clearly it's a lot of the facial stuff has to do with the fifth cranial nerve. So the trigeminal or fifth cranial nerve innervates the upper area here. This lower area, which includes the eye and the eyelids, which is why you see a lot of pressing of the eyes, crunching of the eyes when you hear bad news, and it innervates the mouth. The fifth cranial nerve has a very short distance, and so it pacifies us very quickly. So a lot of the times when we're under stress, that's why we go to the face. I mean, we could massage our feet, but it's too distant. So we go to the face.
It's less polite at the dinner table.
Yeah, it's people frown on that.
You pissed me off, Joe. Oh man.
Yeah, Sanger is stressed, so he's going to massage his big
rubbing
toe.
his feet at the table.
Well, that makes so much sense because the like stereotypical image of like a spa day is the stones on the eyes.
Yeah.
And I was always like, that doesn't look cool at all. But I've never tried it. But I also,
well, now you know.
If I'm irritated, I am going to go, oh man, and rub my eyes.
Yeah.
So there's clearly something to it.
It's the quickest way to pacify. And, in fact, I tell, you see it in business all the time, but I tell parents, one of the quickest ways to get a child to fall asleep is to actually stroke gently the eyes. And it's very, very soothing. But so those are innate, right? Those are hardwired in us. They're in our DNA. The cultural stuff is different. I'll give you a business example of the cultural stuff. Bill Gates went to South Korea a few years ago. And at the time, they had a woman prime minister, and he goes to shake hands with her. And he had his left hand in his pocket. And he just, reached over to shake her hands, kind of like how he would do in California. What was on the front page, and you can look it up, the front page of every newspaper in Asia, the handshake. Nobody knows why he was there. Everybody was very critical, and nobody would have said a word in America, but that's what happens when you have a culture that is context rich, which America is not. We're too young to have a context rich culture.
So the problem was that he had his hand in his pocket while he was shaking her hand?
Yeah.
Okay. And what did that communicate over there?
It's just disrespectful.
I feel like it's mildly, I would consider that to be mildly disrespectful. Not as, I would be surprised to see it in the paper, but if someone shook my hand that way, I'd be like, oh, okay. All right. You're kind of a little brat.
If you grew up in America, you could get away with that. You wouldn't even think about it. And actually that's something that hurts most Americans. Prior to 9/11, only 22% of Americans had passports. We're just not well traveled. We don't understand other cultures. We don't even, if you asked the average person in, let's say, Iowa, and you said, hey, when you go to New York, what is the accepted time that you're allowed to gaze at somebody? And they wouldn't know. They wouldn't be able to tell you that it's 1.28 seconds versus in Iowa, it's almost 4 seconds. That if you ask somebody on the Colorado River Indian Reservation to point out where someone went, that they use their chin. They jet their chin out. They don't use their hand to point. It's if you don't know cultures, it's sort of like Wittgenstein's admonition, the limit of my language is the limit of my world. If you don't know what a regatta is, you don't know what a regatta is. You'll just say, oh, there was a bunch of boats out there. And body language works the same way.
Sanger thought it was that cheese.
The regatta?
Thought it, yeah.
You, not a winner.
It's all about quantity, not quality.
Yeah, it's volume shooting. You said something interesting. You said 22% of people prior to 9/11, 22% of people didn't have a passport in America. And you implied in that statement that number increased after 9/11?
Yes.
Now, this seems like a correlation, not a causation issue. Like, why after 9/11 did it increase?
Right, because of the imposition of rules that you could no longer go to the Bahamas on a passport, or not on a passport, but a driver's license. I used to be able to go to Canada just on a driver's license. Now you needed a passport.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, same with Mexico, right?
Same with Mexico. You just showed him your Arizona. When I was in Arizona, I just showed him my Arizona driver's license.
So there were a lot of people that were like, well, I was cool with just going to Canada, Mexico, and the Bahamas, but now I've got to get a passport.
Yeah, I got to get a passport.
All right. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what's happened also is, once they have their passport, they figure, well, let me go let me go somewhere else. Let me go to Greece or Italy and so forth.
Do you know what that number is now?
I don't know. I mean, the last time I checked on this, I was working on a book at the time. I think by 2010, it was 26%. But I mean, that's the kind of thing you can go online.
It still seems very low. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, compared to Europe, where
they have to.
Well, they get it. They get their passports really early. Yeah.
So speaking of traveling through airports, things like that, if we look at body language, particularly the biological and the cultural distinctive body language and nonverbal communication, are there ways that you see AI coming in, analyzing body language incongruencies, and using that for security or advertising, other things?
I mean, I've been approached by so many companies. Actually, I signed an NDA on some research. But here's the thing: AI has a lot of limitations. Part of it has to do with I'll give you an example. If you wrinkle your forehead, it could mean surprise. It could mean you're disbelieving. It could mean there's any number of things. So you can teach AI to pick up on a behavior, right? And give it certain attributes. But what AI has a problem with is, for instance, context. What are the things that have happened in your life in the last 10, 15 minutes, right? So let's say I had a flat tire before I came on this microphone. Maybe during my conversation, I might reflect on, oh, shoot, as soon as I'm done, I've got to go change that. So you may see behaviors that correlate with something that happened in the past or something that's going to happen in the future. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is we know that AI now is predominantly fed with the stereotypical behaviors of, let's say, that somebody that looks like somebody like you, but not somebody that is like me. A Cuban background, Spanish heritage, that type of thing. And so, you know, the biological influences of other prior generations is difficult for AI to pick up on. So we see it skewed where it can pick up somebody from the Midwest, but it has difficulty with someone from, let's say, a recent arrival from Italy, now living in New York.
Well, the reason I ask is you were mentioning some of these consistent biological traits. And I would think that, you know, if we've got somebody in interrogation, there's going to be some consistent behaviors that would indicate deception, right? So, for example, if I've got to, if I'm being interrogated or somebody's being interrogated, they take a polygraph, and the polygraph can pick up on these biological moves. Wouldn't we be able to utilize AI to analyze some of these body language and nonverbal cues and determine the same thing?
Well, let me answer it this way. Number one is there is no single behavior indicative of deception. And if you've ever had somebody on your show that says they can detect deception through body language, they don't know what they're talking about. Since 1986, in the work of Paul Ekman, Bella DePaulo, Mark Frank, Judy Burgoon, there is not one single behavior indicative of deception. That's number one. Number two, the polygraph doesn't detect deception. It never has. It's impossible. What it detects is your reaction to a stimuli. How that stimuli is crafted and who does the test factors in. That's why it's not accepted in any court. There's no court in America that accepts the polygraph because the American Academy of Sciences basically said it's rubbish. It is only slightly better than voodoo because you can point to the machine and say, it says you're lying. Now, here's what's interesting. When they did the DNA exonerations, right? They went back and looked at individuals that were on death row. They found that, and it wasn't their DNA, so it was somebody else. What they found was that 25% of the people that said that, okay, I'm willing to stop this. I'll admit it, if you just stop the interrogation, 25% of I wrote about this for Psychology Today. 25% of the people were willing to put their own life at risk just to stop the interrogation process. So there's your reality for interviewing. And I've done 13,000 interviews. I actually am beginning to understand this topic. It is very difficult to implement any device with deception. The best you can observe during interview is, I'll give you a case in point. I asked Ricky Gates, Indian Reservation. He used an ice pick to kill somebody. Now, nobody knew that except the perpetrator and myself. And so I said, okay, Ricky, you tell me that you didn't do it. But if you had, would you have used a machete? Would you have used a machine gun? Would you have used a hammer? And then I said, would you have used an ice pick? Now, the way the brain works, the way the amygdala works, it recognizes the one word that can hurt him. And when he heard the word ice pick, that's when his chin came down and his eyes came down. So we're not detecting deception. What we're detecting is how people feel about a question that's being asked. And if you're troubled by that question, then I will pursue it. So that's really how you use interviewing and looking for indicators of distress. But deception, even for instance, we know that the face can flush hotter. Becomes vasodilated when we're very stressed. Now, some people have argued, well, that could show you deception, except that it also can show when we're embarrassed. Like, where were you last night when you were supposed to be with the boys, but you weren't? So that's the problem with AI at the moment. I suspect in the future they'll be able to do more with it. But not at the moment. I think now you'd get a lot of false positives.
So it's giving you breadcrumbs or clues, but it's not giving you clear answers, right?
Yeah.
It's giving you things to look at. The doors are cracking open that you can pursue, but it's not going to give you a big neon sign.
Yeah, exactly. If I ask you, where were you last night, and your first reaction is to ventilate before you answer, why are you ventilating
There's
to
something
answer the
about
question?
Last night that I need to, I need to ask a little bit more about this.
I was with the boys, right? It just gives you an indicator. We know the skin will change in temperature 1/250th of a second. So it gives me an opportunity to say, I wonder why he's troubled by this question. Or had you pondered the question and say, last night as you're massaging the neck and covering the suprasternal notch, again, why is he doing that?
Yeah.
But you certainly couldn't point a finger at somebody and say you're lying. Anyway, that's what the research says.
Yeah, you mentioned false confessions, and that's such an overwhelming number. I mean, 25% of people are willing to confess to something that they did not do in order to stop the interrogation. I would guess that if you polled people who have not been in an interrogation, the number of people who would say, yeah, I guess I could see how I might confess to something that I didn't do in order to stop an interrogation would be next to zero. And I think that seems to be reflected in juries and courts' unwillingness to look past a confession. If a defendant has confessed to something, even if the DNA evidence, discredits that, the jury is still going to get really hung up on, geez, but the guy confessed. I mean, what the heck? Like, he confessed though, even if he's taken that confession back and said, no, I admitted it just in the interview. So what causes that? What is it about interrogations that are so uncomfortable that people are willing to do something that appears very, very illogical? The risk reward seems very skewed. Short term, I get to go home. Long term, I might have life in prison. And then two, why is it so hard for people who haven't been in that position to empathize with it?
Yeah. First of all, keep in mind, the United States has 17,500 different police departments. Think about that. 17,500 different police departments. They don't all train the same. They don't all hire the same. They don't have the same experience. They don't have the same budget. They don't all do interviewing the same way. When you have such disparity, that's part of the problem. That one of the studies that I remember was done back in the 80s and asked law enforcement, where do you principally learn to interview and interrogate? You know what they said?
No.
Television.
No way. Oh man.
Television, because you get more hours of interviewing experience. I went through the Utah Police Academy. Their block of instruction for police officer was 8 hours on interviewing. Do you know what you learn in 8 hours?
Basically nothing.
Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And so, in fact, the last time I was teaching for a while at the University of Tampa. And I remember talking to the head of the department there, Phil Quinn, and he said it's pretty much, this was 97, 98. He said it's pretty much still the same way. Most police departments, they'll spend a lot of time on arrests and procedures and firearms, but not interviewing. That's part of the problem. The other problem is the assumption that the person sitting in front of you must be guilty because they're exhibiting signs of guilt, without realizing that the little room that you just put them in, that you just put them in the corner. Just look at all the videos online. Where do the suspect usually sit? They put him in the corner of the room, surrounded by police officers. If we were in the same room together, Sean, you in particular, because you have a very ruddy skin, I could make your skin turn red in about 5 seconds. Just by the way I look at you.
Just by opening the blind. Yeah, it starts that way. It starts out. I wake up in the morning that way.
Even now, just by focusing too much on you. And so police officers were picking up on behaviors that they themselves caused. And so what happens is the human brain thrives on psychological comfort. In the absence of psychological comfort, we will acquiesce. And this is what happened when they did the Stanford prison experiments. The Stanford prison experiment showed that half the students would become bullies and half the students would genuflect and allow themselves to be tormented physically, to the point where the experiment can no longer in America be replicated because it happened within 72 hours. And that's the problem with humans. It's not an individual problem, it's a species problem that we immediately begin to acquiesce because we thrive under psychological comfort. And when we don't get it, then we yield.
How can we as business owners look at taking that information and making sure that both employees or customers and clients are more comfortable interacting with our teams?
The one thing I've learned in 50 years of studying human behavior is that, and I talk about this in the book, Be Exceptional, is if you set the goal business-wide, organizational-wise, as we're going to provide psychological comfort, let each organization, and that's your goal, let each organization sort out how that is done. For Steve Jobs, it was, I'm going to make a computer that is so easy to use that everybody will buy it. He went from 3% of the market to whatever it is now, all because of that mentality. The goal was psychological comfort. When he created the stores, Sanger, you're too young to remember, but your dad remembers. When we went to shop for computers, they were ugly. They were in boxes. You couldn't touch them. When you got them out of the box, they remained ugly. They remained huge, and so forth. Well, what did Steve Jobs do? He said, you know what? When I go visit Levy downstairs and he's working on a bench, and I love to go and touch the computers, and they're accessible. They're not in boxes. You can actually handle them. What is the essence of that? Psychological comfort. You take 2 gas stations. You take one that's charging $3.99, but you make the lights really bright at night. And you take another one that's $3.85, but the lights don't work that well. They flicker. Some of the bulbs are missing. People will actually flock to the higher price because the lights provide psychological comfort. There's the underpinning. That's what every business needs to figure out. It's not the product. It is, can I provide psychological comfort? And if you can do that with whatever it is that you do, if you're selling psychological comfort. You're not selling this is a pencil. But if I can make your life easier, because this pencil has the best eraser on the market, it has the best lead on the market, you're going to pay more.
I had that experience. I was doing some consulting years ago, went into an office. This was a financial advisory office. And because you're talking about psychological comfort, and what they had in the lobby were not magazines targeted to their clients. They didn't have People magazine or a travel magazine or Road and Track or they had industry publications, which were all about
Financial Times.
This person is suing this person, or here's how to, this is the problem with the tax
5
law.
reasons a bear market's coming in 2025.
Yeah. And then they had, rather than have like the Travel Channel on, or showing pretty pictures of nature up on their TV, they had CNBC, which is all about
always negative.
Oh yeah, the stock market is plunging today. Just all of this anxiety.
Stock market was only up 4% today. Right. Yeah, they find any way to turn it bad.
My gosh. And I told him, I said, man, you are creating a lot of anxiety in your lobby before people even start a conversation with one of your advisors.
Yeah. And so by the time you get in, and they then begin to create that psychological comfort by saying, this is what it can do for you. I think this is the biggest factor that successful companies have found. I'm on the global board for the Libra Group. The Libra Group is worldwide. They have everything from shipping to aircraft to hospitality to everything. Huge company. And they've made that part of their criteria. Is we will set the goal of creating psychological comfort, whether it's the best deal that we can offer, whether it's timely deliveries, whether it's greeting our guests when they arrive on our property, whatever it is, that's the top criteria. And I think when you simplify it, and Steve Jobs did, then it really makes sense. You don't have to make it really complicated. In negotiations, right? Negotiations, people make it so complicated. And negotiations is effective communication with a purpose, so long as there's some sort of psychological comfort. So long as there's some sort of psychological comfort, can I walk away from this and feel good about it? And those are going to be your best negotiations.
Final question. What would you say is your biggest decision-making tip for business owners?
I think the biggest one that I've seen, and probably the most powerful one, is be very selective of who you bring on board. Bring in people that are problem solvers. Not necessarily what they've studied, not necessarily what university, but people that love to fix problems. Those, interestingly enough, are the business sectors that I consult with. They love that. When they bring in problem solvers have histories of solving problems. They're the ones that are going to stay late. They're the ones that will figure it out. They'll figure out how to use PowerPoint. That's not a big issue. They'll learn things fast. I think a lot of businesses ask the wrong question. Where'd you go to school? What was your GPA?
What was your biggest achievement in the last 5 years? Yeah. What's your accolades and resume? Yeah.
Interesting, Sanger. You could have no achievement because you haven't had the opportunity.
I agree 100%.
But hand me a problem solver? What did you do? Well, my next door neighbor, her car door wouldn't open. So what did you do? Well, the glass didn't come down either. So did you break the glass? No, because she was scared and didn't have money. What did you use? I used tape. I looked on YouTube and I saw that you can use tape to bring the glass down. There's your problem solver. I want to bring that person on board, and I want to do it now because they'll figure it out. And I think that's been the biggest thing that I've seen.
Hey, Joe, thanks for being with us. I appreciate it. I've been nervous about what I'm doing with my body the whole time, just like with my arms and heads.
Yeah, you're under judgment.
Yeah, Brittany.
Yeah, where can people connect with you and the work that you do, Joe?
Oh, good. They can just they can just Google my name, joenavarro.net or Joe Navarro, and they'll find me.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I think there was a lot to get from what Joe talked about. The things he said about body language, we had talked about before. We had some people on that talked about incongruencies with the deception and things like that. And it was interesting to go through that. He made a comment that I picked up on that was kind of a throwaway comment at the time. And it was about the person who sets the pace is the leader. And so you can throw away positional leadership in a hierarchy of a business if you have someone who is setting the pace for good or for bad. Like if you have somebody who's slowing down the office, slowing down decision makings, slowing down progress, slowing down solving problems, that person, whether you like it or not, is leading your office, but they're leading it to a slower pace than what you may want. And the faster you recognize it and fix it, the better off you'll be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the pace setter, if you're relying on positional authority, oh my gosh, you're never going to effectively set the pace.
Yeah.
I really resonated with his last comment about problem solvers. I believe that's the most important quality. You can learn the technical knowledge necessary to be successful in most cases. If I'm hiring a brain surgeon, they probably need some technical knowledge that I can't teach them. But in general, for most jobs that are out there, problem solving is the biggest number one skill. And I'd say it's a more important skill than work ethic even. Yeah.
You just made a great decision to listen to this episode of Decidedly. Make another great decision by subscribing to the show and leaving us a review wherever you're listening. We appreciate the support. It helps business owners like you find our community and defeat bad decision-making in their own lives. For more decision-making insights, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com, on Instagram at decidedlypodcast, or grab a copy of Sanger and Sean's books from the links in the show notes. Finally, we'd like to thank Shelby Peterson of Transcend Media for editing and post-production of the show. Thanks for listening. I'm Morgan, your producer, and this is Decidedly.